Thank you very much, Sarah. Our next speaker is Mark Clayton. Mark is a research and impact project officer working with the Montfort University Square Mile project, which is basically the volunteering project, the main volunteering project of the university. Mark joined the Montfort University this summer after a 30-year career in journalism, working primarily with the Leicester Mercury in a whole variety of roles, such as from features editor to deputy editor, and most recently head of sport. As for the volunteering project at the Montfort University, just last year, a total of 4,056 students were involved in volunteering activities or events, and varied out a total of 26,196 hours of volunteering across 126 projects. And some of that work obviously involved working and supporting people looking for refuge in the UK. So I'll leave the stage to Mark now. Thank you.
I just realised I wrote some of that, didn't I? And
yes.
I stole the intro. No. Good evening. As I say, I'm Mark Clayton from Montfort University, and I work in the Public Engagement Department, or Square Mile as it's known publicly, which is basically the volunteering arm of the university. So, as you've just rightly said, in the last academic year we had 4,000 students that took part in public engagement, events, projects, activities, and did something in the realm of, how many did I say, 26,900?
Yeah,
26,900 hours of volunteering. That's a big commitment to volunteering, and a proportion of that does go towards working with refugees and asylum seekers. But don't get me wrong, I'm not here by any means to try and take any plaudits or credit. In fact, I'm probably going to challenge your argument that you know the least about refugees and asylum seekers. But I think that's an important point, because I've only been doing this job for 6 years after 6 months. Yeah, it feels like 6 years. After a career and a lifetime, and it seems like a lifetime in journalism. Now, I could give you a whole thesis on the media and refugees, but let's ignore that. I mentioned the change in career because I think it's actually important. Because when I approached the job, I approached it with fresh eyes on the issue of forced migration. So I will happily admit that when I started the job, I knew little or nothing about the details and the problems faced by refugees and asylum seekers. In fact, I would guess that if you'd have asked me 6 months ago, what's the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee, I wouldn't have been able to answer it coherently. Now, I believe that's the first barrier that refugees and asylum seekers face, because I don't believe for 1 minute that I'm stupid. Someone will probably argue who know me about that, but I don't think that 99% of the people in this country have any idea of the difference between an asylum seeker and refugee, and that ignorance is a problem, because there is an inbuilt prejudice of ignorance that breeds. People don't have any idea of the hardship faced by asylum seekers, the pitiful amount they get per week. That's £35.74, is it, or something that's been mentioned, that they have to live on, and the ongoing nightmare, and people could talk about this all day, that they face to achieve refugee status. They also don't realise that asylum seekers can't work. More importantly for the topic tonight, can't get access to student finance or don't get any benefits. They also don't realise that gaining refugee status, they then have a mountain to climb. The first of which, I believe I'm right in saying, is just 30 days to find a new home with no money and often facing real destitution. The issue of the public, and I suspect political ignorance, is that this affects the prospect of real political change, and it is politicians, probably forced by public pressure, who will bring about that real change. The public misconceptions mean that there is no appetite for politicians to even think of changing the law, perhaps to address the unfairness or hardship couldn't we allow asylum seekers to work or gain access to student finance, for example? But universities should lead by example, and then hopefully the general public and politicians may just follow. Finance, that has been mentioned several times tonight, is a massive barrier to access to university for asylum seekers. How can anybody, even the most gifted asylum seeker, even contemplate going to university and having to finance it themselves? Very few people in this country could afford to do that, let alone somebody in the position of an asylum seeker. And without wishing to rock the boat here, I'll challenge a bit of a misconception. The idea of international tuition fees being a barrier is correct, but it's also not a solution, because even if you reduced it simply to home status, with no financial support, an asylum seeker could not afford the £9,000 tuition fees plus the support. So it's a political point, but I don't think that would particularly help the issue. One of the ways through it, of course, and it's been mentioned again tonight, is Article 26, or soon to be sanctuary scholarships offered by universities. Montfort University now offers 8 of those each year, which has risen from 1 to 4 and now 8 in recent years. Next year we'll have a total of 24 students on Article 26, or possibly sanctuary scholarships by then. And we have a further 3 Syrian academics sponsored as part of the CARA programme, which is ongoing. Is it enough? Well, probably not, to be quite honest with you. But sadly, as well, it is one of the best offerings around with universities at the moment. Every university needs to consistently review just how inclusive it is to all sections of society. And DMU, through our particularly proactive Vice-Chancellor, is committed to that inclusivity. As demonstrated recently by the 2019 University of the Year Award for Social Inclusion in the Sunday Times Good University Guide. A further barrier, as Alison quite rightly mentioned, to higher education is qualifications. An uninterrupted education, lost paperwork, or even qualifications gained in another country but not considered the equivalent standard in Britain can all be barriers. If you're an asylum seeker or refugee and don't have an A-level, it is impossible to get one post-19, and we had this conversation, didn't we? You can do O-levels till you're 125, but try doing an A-level. It's not possible. 2 years ago, we started something at Montfort University called the Aspire programme. It came about after talks with the Leicester City Mayor's office, after it became apparent that a lot of youngsters in so-called hard-to-reach areas on city estates were just missing out on university places. So what the Aspire programme does is it offers teenagers a week-long course that gives them a taste of university life, but also gives them bonus points towards being able to study at university. One of the things that we're presently working on is devising a similar scheme for refugees that will improve their university prospects. It will also be backed up by English courses with the presumption that they will be given enough time to learn necessary language skills to also gain access to university. It is a start, but a continuing journey, but Montfort University is committed to be as inclusive as possible. And with the fact that the United Nations have recently awarded us the honour of being the world lead on the Join Together campaign to mobilise higher education institutions on the issue of forced migration, it is obviously a long-term commitment from the university. So thank you. Now, I kept this reasonably short so I could either be heckled or ask questions, but we're doing questions later. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.